This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service.
Manx Radio.
From riots to reconciliation sums up the theme of today's programme, and it's going to take us from Sunderland to central France in the company of Rev'd Chris Howson. But first, as tomorrow is St Patrick's Day, let's begin with a musical setting of the prayer for protection that's attributed to the patron saint of Ireland, often known as St Patrick's Breastplate or the Deer's Cry.
I arise today through the strength of heaven, light of sun, radiance of moon, splendor of fire, speed of lightning, swiftness of wind, depth of the sea, stability of earth, firmness of rock. I arise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's eye to look before me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to protect me. From all who shall wish me ill, afar and anear, alone and in a against every cruel, merciless power that may oppose my body and soul. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I rise, Christ to shield me, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me. I arise today.
Angelina with St Patrick's Prayer for Protection. And now let's welcome today's guest. Chris Howson grew up on a council estate, left school with very few qualifications and expected to follow his dad onto his milk round. But his conversion to Christianity at the age of 17 brought with it a desire to improve his education. So Chris went back to college, and then, as he wanted to put his faith into action, he became a social worker. Chris has always seen higher education as the main way to improve community and encourage people to be the best they could be in life. So, in addition to church-related work among homelessness, addiction and the prison system, he's always supported the struggle for student rights. In the late 1990s, Chris felt a calling to ordained ministry, was accepted for training in Durham, and there fell in love with the northeast of England. His desire to always show his faith in action and his deep concern for the flourishing of students has made him an ideal chaplain to Sunderland University, a role that he's held for around 12 years now, as well as being interfaith advisor for the Diocese of Durham. Chris is a formidable force for good, working for unity and reconciliation, showing the real benefits when local and diverse communities work together for mutual benefit. A measure of the value placed on his work is shown by his receiving the British Empire Medal in the King's New Year's Honours List last year, specifically for his services to higher education. Chris loves Sunderland, but he also loves the Isle of Man. So when he was here for a brief visit last weekend, I thought we could combine the best of all worlds by heading to the West Coast, having a walk full of beautiful views, and then recording a conversation just as the sun was setting on the beach at Niarbyl. And it's clear that Chris has lost none of his affection for the island.
We've been to, I think it's called the White Beach, which is just a little bit on from where Ned's house is from the film. And we went to just a lovely little place. I don't know what the name of the stream is, but it's a little waterfall that hits the White Beach and then flows across the pebbles and the stones into the sea. And it's just one of my favourite memories of seeing that the first time. And it's still as beautiful. It'll always be as beautiful. It's God's nature. It's wonderful.
But what a contrast to what you have seen in recent years in your own ministry. Now, you started life as a social worker. You've always been very, very concerned with the true heart of people, where it hurts. And for quite some years, you've been chaplain to Sunderland University. You've had increased role recently in looking after the Minster. But I want to talk about another really, really painful situation that you were part of. Not just painful, but frightening. And that was the rioting in Sunderland, Chris.
Yeah, Sunderland is quite a peaceful place. I moved there from Bradford to there, and it's not the sort of place you would imagine hardcore rioting. But last summer there'd been this just awful, tragic incident where the 3 girls had been murdered, and the far right used that to whip up a frenzy of hatred towards Muslims and refugees. Now, I chair the Sunderland City of Sanctuary, where we make people feel very welcome and safe when they come to our city from Syria and from Ukraine and from all over. And when we realised that they were going to target Sunderland, we were terrified. I mean, we'd seen terrible battles on the streets in Hartlepool just a few days before, and we knew that it was all going to come to Sunderland. So we were ready. We had lots of meetings with the police. We thought we were going to be okay, but the police were heavily outnumbered on the day. About 1,000 people came into the city, and then they picked up local people who were involved in this, and it was just scary to watch. I mean, there was burning cars outside my church, and in the media, the stories of the far right people trying to kick down tombstones to make missiles to throw at the police who were just below our church. And so I was in the middle of all that. It was frightening, absolutely terrifying. A lot of young people have a real hatred towards the police, and they thought it was an opportunity to take out that hatred. The police were attacked far more than the Muslim community. They bore the brunt of it. More of my job was to monitor and to be there with the far right as they gathered. And I'd been in the pub, that's all the Tommy Robinson chanting and everything, and realised it was getting uglier and uglier. But I looked out on Keele Square. I saw a mum with her I presume her son, and out of her bag she pulls out a balaclava to put on him, to disguise him. And these are sort of probably 14, 15-year-old lads and parents bringing balaclavas to help their children attack the police and the Muslim community. It was terrifying. So there are some people who that their politics are very, very vicious, and they wanted violence and they were ready for violence. There was a pretense that there was going to be a rally and a talk, but there was none of that. At 7 o'clock they massed. They've got a very specific technique, and that is encouraging people to gather from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the pubs. So they go to the pubs and they're getting drunker and drunker, and then there's going to be something in the evening, and it was 7 o'clock on that particular Friday, and people are drunk, and the leaders know that they're going to get people into trouble. They know they're going to get these youngsters locked up. They don't care. They want the fight. They want the riot.
You're saying that they outnumbered the police, as you could well imagine. Did it kind of burn itself out?
First of all, they marched on a mosque that they'd targeted before, so we were prepared for that. And Zafik Bell, my dear friend, who's the other co-chair of the Sunderland Interfaith Forum, he was inside that mosque with a few other people, and they'd battened down the hatches. But the far right targeted that, and there was an attempt to even burn it down. Police lines kind of held, and eventually the far right turned back and went into the city centre. And that was where the fighting was at its worst, and they tried to burn down what they thought was a police station. It was actually hadn't been used for about 8 years, so it was clear that people weren't local with that poor knowledge. What they actually burnt down was our Citizens Advice Bureau, which are wonderful people doing a really important job. So that was really sad to see so much damage to the city. We contained the people who were trying to damage the churchyard, and we chased them out. I'd been doing earlier a wedding rehearsal with a couple, and the bloke who was there was a huge guy, and he was brilliant, and he helped me literally hold the gates to stop people running through the churchyard to throw missiles at the police, and we eventually locked the gates, stopped them from being a rat run for the far right. But it was pretty bad. I mean, it fizzled out because the rain came, and it was like, thank you God. Because if the rain hadn't come, it would have probably carried on to the early hours of the morning. And it carried on the next day as well. The kids were about. Most of the organisers had moved on to Newcastle. So you could see these sort of gangs of young lads wandering around. They were still breaking windows and that, but the police were able to sort of outnumber them.
So, having been in such a terrifying situation yourself, something for which nothing in your ministry and in your life could prepare you, how did you repair yourself out of that?
Well, the first thing is the community came and repaired itself, and I always call it the theology of sweeping up in these terrible times when, not just riots, but when there's fires and climatic disasters. People come together, don't they, after earthquakes, and to see that we helped organise people to come and sweep up, and people in the morning brought their brooms and their dustpans, and we were giving out free tea and coffee in the Minster, in the local pub called the Peacock, that had helped organise this community stuff. And thousands of people came out, and this is something that we saw throughout the country, is that actually good people who were horrified to see the far right besmirch the name of our wonderful city. Sunderland's a great, loving city. It is a city of sanctuary, and people came out and did that, and that was really healing to be part of that. But 2 days after the riots, I had booked going to Taize. And so thankfully for me, I was able to go with my wife and 2 children to Taize. And Taize is why actually I've come to the island to do a retreat about the work of Taize, and why its spirituality is really wonderful and deep and really helpful when you're facing challenging times. Because the whole of the Taize experience is about reconciliation and what to do out of conflict. So obviously a lot of people associate Taize with it. They might know the chants, they might have sung some of those in their churches, they might have heard of Brother Roger, the founder. They might not know the depth of all that. He started up the community in 1940 as a young person trying to help the church recognise the voice of young people and their concerns. Europe was a mess. And he set up this community, brought a couple of brothers together. And where they were under Vichy government, many people were fleeing Nazi Germany and were coming over, and he was hiding Jewish people and hiding trade unionists and communist people on the run. And they did that for 2 years in this little community house in this beautiful village in Burgundy. And then it became too dangerous. The Gestapo found out about this, and he was fundraising, I think, in Switzerland when he heard that the Gestapo were waiting for him to return, so he couldn't go back. But at the end of the war, in 1944, when the Germans had been pushed out of that bit of France, he goes back. Brother Roger brings Brother Max and various people with him, and they do an incredible thing. At the bottom of the valley is an internment camp for Germans. And he recognised that the biggest pressing need was to serve these people and to bring them meals. Some of them were starving, medical aid, and began ministering to the German people who were interned. Imagine how hated the Germans were at that point, and one had been murdered in the village, murdered by a group of women. So the community was saying, well, okay, how do we nurse Europe back together from this horrendous thing. And their ministry and their mission really became about how to bring young people together, to give them a way of talking to each other and listening to each other and learning from each other. And that's why even today, if you go there, lots of young people from Germany, from Holland, you'll meet Jewish people visiting, you'll meet Palestinians. When I was there, it was incredible to hear Russians and Ukrainian young people together singing. It was extraordinary. And their whole focus has been reconciliation. If you go to Taize, the main chapel is called the Chapel of Reconciliation. It's the reason their chants are so multilingual. You've got a Manx version now, I understand. The reason for that was that they were trying to bring people from a wide variety of backgrounds, so you can sing the song in English or in Latin or in German or Spanish. And the worship is around bringing people together using the simple songs, but also silence and communal silence. And that's, if you go to Taize, it's always a bit of a shock to go into a worship where there's a lot of silence, but it's very powerful to sit with 4,000 young people. Every week about 4,000 people go during the summer and sit in communal silence together. But I think in these days when there is so much conflict going on, the Israel-Palestine conflict, the conflict in Ukraine, the world order being turned upside down by Trump and Putin alliance, what a world that might be. It feels that we need more reconciliation. We need more to listen to the voice of peace, the voice of how do we resolve conflicts. And Taize is a part for that. For Christians, it's really rooted in it. So it was a pleasure to come to the island and talk about that and share some of those experiences. But also to say that when we go through our own traumas, like going through a riot or going through a breakdown or a breakup or a loss of job, whatever, we all need places that we can go to that will nurture us and return us to some sort of sense of hope and normality. And Taize worship can do that. And I wanted people to think about where do they go when things are really difficult and when they feel broken, and how they find places that can sustain them through all that.
But how heartening that Taize is such a mecca for young people.
They love it. Where do you go to in the UK or on Ireland where you see loads and loads of young people wanting to worship together, wanting to sing, wanting to pray together, asking questions? You go for a whole week and there's a whole series. You go worship 3 times a day and you have a Bible study. But in all those things, you're never told what to think. You're always encouraged to relate to people and discuss things and work out what you feel about things. Young people want to be listened to and actually their views valued. I took my 2 daughters for the first time 2 years ago and they fell in love with that. And one thing they said to me that was important is that they really felt valued and listened to. The adults, the grown-ups, over 35s, we all go off to another place. And the young people, they're still allowed to be young people themselves. Both the daughters found friendships from across not just Europe, but across the globe that's been really important to them. Relationship and being listened to is important to young people. It's not all about newfangled worship songs. It's always about relating to God and relating to people. And young people get that. I would like to see more people from the UK and the Isle of Man go to Taize itself. Since Brexit, fewer English people are going there. And we need our young people to have that depth of experience. People might not be able to get to Taize, but they might need to just find a place of pilgrimage and stillness and hope here on the island. I mean, this is the island for pilgrimage, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
it is.
It's a place that nurtures me, and I hope people find a little nook or cranny where they can feel listened to and feel up close to God. Taize helps bring people back to God, sometimes when they've had a break from God.
We do have, in a number of our churches across the denominations, times of prayer in the style of Taize, using the chants, using silence. Ruth Kegan-Gell, our Manx Language Development Officer, has already translated at least half a dozen of the most popular chants into Manx, and so we're getting used to singing them in Manx.
I can remember doing a service for some of our newly arrived Ukrainians, a welcome service, and we did a very simple thing, and we used Taize. And in the books there are some Ukrainian Taize words, and they couldn't believe it. It's such a beautiful thing to allow people to use the languages that God has given them. But yeah, a beautiful thing. I'm so pleased. I heard someone singing a bit of the Manx, so I was excited, and maybe I'll come back and hear much more of that. Thank you for taking me to this beautiful place. God bless.
Gauji Arenan Molyi, sing praises all you people, a Taize chant translated into Manx and recorded locally during an informal time of prayer in the Taize style, seems the right way to follow that conversation with Rev'd Chris Howson, Lead Chaplain at the University of Sunderland and a tireless campaigner for peace through reconciliation and unity. This is the season that the Church calls Lent, a time when we're encouraged to take a little time to reflect on our own beliefs and values. Some might say it's spring cleaning our life for God. And last week I mentioned some ways that might help you to make the most of this time. Reverend Dr. Janet Corlett is inviting anyone who enjoys a walk and some fellowship to join her each Monday morning for Planet, People and Prayer. Each Monday there'll be a mindful walk for about an hour, then an hour at a church that's on the route of the walk for refreshments and a time of prayer of the quiet and contemplative kind, finishing by 11:30. And tomorrow, that's the 17th, the walk will be in the north. You're invited to meet at St Stephen's Church on the Strait in the centre of Sulby Village at 9:15, ready to start walking at 9:30. St Stephen's Church is set slightly back off the main road with the church hall attached to it and a little car park right in front of the hall. Tomorrow it's a circular walk of about 2 miles, ending back at St Stephen's for hot drinks and cakes and quiet prayer. And everyone is warmly welcomed. No need to book, just come along. Next week's walk is in the west, starting in Peel. More details on next Sunday's notice board. I also mentioned last week that Bishop Tricia has produced, specially for us, a series of 6 weekly podcasts called Conversations with Jesus that can be downloaded via the Manx Radio website. The first one is there now, and a new podcast will be added every Monday morning. Bishop Tricia has also recorded this introduction, which tells you everything you need to know.
Make a little time for God and rest a while in Him. Speak now to God and say with your whole heart, I seek your face, Lord, I desire. Those are the words of St Anselm, who lived in the 12th century. 900 years later, I think we have even greater need to make a little time for God and rest a while in Him. And maybe Lent is a good time to get into the habit of doing exactly that. So, welcome to Conversations with Jesus. We all love a conversation, don't we? Whether it's in the supermarket car park or over a good cup of coffee, we love to talk. And I believe Jesus realised the power of words, because the Gospels are rich with conversations that Jesus had with individuals, families and communities. And it is in these encounters that we see God bring His power to work amongst us. I believe that God still speaks to us today, but maybe we're not always in the right place to listen. And perhaps these weeks of the season that the Church calls Lent, the weeks that lead up to the great feast of Easter, that is, at the very heart of our Christian belief, are a great time to reflect on some of those conversations and to ask ourselves, what was Jesus saying then, and what might His words be saying to me now? So, as St Anselm suggests, let's make a little time for God and rest a while in Him. Now, I'm not going to give you any instructions. This is a podcast, so you might be listening while driving, walking, doing the dishes, having a lunch break, or winding down before bed. You might be healthy, home-sighted, happy, or hurting. Whatever or whenever, Jesus is talking to you, to me, to both of us. By the time we get to Easter, there will be 6 of these conversations. Each one stands alone, but you'll see that the first ones are incidents that happen while Jesus was meeting people, whilst He was teaching and preaching. The latter ones are exchanges between Jesus and those who were present at His trials, His death, and His burial. So it doesn't matter if you listen out of order. Just hold on to the thought that Easter Day is all about Jesus coming to life, overcoming death once and for all, and opening up for each one of us the path to an everlasting life with him. The hope of resurrection cannot and will not be suppressed, and you'll feel it hovering in and around every conversation. Each conversation will start with some music to help you put aside, just for a little while, anything that's on your mind. But don't worry if you get distracted, we're humans after all. Just take a moment to come back to the theme. Then there'll be a reading from the Bible, a reflection on what we've just heard. Then we'll pray together and finish with more music. And that's the time to rest a while in him. And in that peacefulness, hear what God might want to say to you. You might want to listen to each podcast as it arrives week by week. Alternatively, you might prefer to wait till all 6 podcasts are available and then listen to one each day during Holy Week, the week leading up to Easter Sunday. Just do what's best for you. As I've just said, I'll be offering some thoughts that I hope you might find helpful. But more importantly, though, as you listen, remind yourself that you are in God's presence and that God welcomes you with love. Ask God to guide your time with him and trust God to do so.
Thank you, Bishop Tricia. And to find the Lent podcasts, go to manxradio.com and under the podcasts tab on the homepage, just search for At Your Service and you'll find the podcasts there alongside the podcasts for this programme, but titled At Your Service, Conversations with Jesus. Supporting the Lent lunches around the island is another good way to mark these weeks. Simple but nourishing home-cooked food, all raising money for good causes. The menu is a choice of soups with bread, desserts and hot drinks. Here's a reminder of all the information that I have. Every Monday there'll be Lent lunches in the Parish Hall of St George and All Saints in Alexander Drive here in Douglas, served between noon and 1:30. No set charge, just donate as you're able. The churches in the north of the island will be serving Lent lunches in St Paul's Hall in Ramsey on the 2 Tuesdays in March. That's the 18th and the 25th, between 11:30 and 2 p.m. The Abbey Church in Ballasalla will be serving Lent lunches in their hall next to the Abbey Church each Tuesday from noon. And every Thursday you can pop into the Cool Church Hall on Cool Road in Braddon, where they're serving their Lent lunches between noon and 2 o'clock. And every Friday, St Thomas's Church here in Douglas, just off the promenade near the Gaiety Theatre, is where you'll find Lent lunches being served between noon and 1:30. Now, let's see what else is on our notice board. And this evening there's a Songs of Praise at the Howe Chapel starting at 6:30. Everyone's welcome for a good sing and a chance to choose your favourite hymn. And of course, there'll be refreshments afterwards. Looking ahead to Saturday the 22nd, and the Londu Male Voice Choir will be in concert in Onken Methodist Church on the main road in Onken. It starts at 2:30 with free admission and refreshments afterwards. And also on Saturday the 22nd, Ballafesson Chapel in Port Erin have a coffee afternoon from 2 until 3:30, and admission is just £2. And last but by no means least, the Mariners Choir will be at the Cool Chapel, taking part in the evening service there at 6:30 next Sunday evening, when Reverend Rebecca Ingruel will preach, and as usual, there'll be supper and community hymn singing afterwards. And that's all that we have time for now, but I'll be back tonight at 9, waiting to open the door to our virtual lounge and welcome you in for a mix of all kinds of music, plus your requests and dedications. And I'd love you to join me if you can. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a peaceful and truly blessed week, and a very good morning.
Station, Manx